The aroma of turpentine and paint filled the cramped studio where Darnell Price, a young black artist with piercing brown eyes and an air of quiet determination, stood before his latest masterpiece. The canvas, a sprawling narrative of human resilience, vibrated with emotion. It depicted figures emerging from shadows, their faces etched with pain and hope, a reflection of Darnell's life story. Yet, despite his extraordinary talent, the world around him seemed blind to his brilliance. Darnell's journey as an artist had always been uphill. Born in the inner city to a single mother who worked 3 jobs to make ends meet, he had learned early that nothing came easily. As a child, his talent for drawing became an escape from the harsh realities of poverty and systemic prejudice. His mother, ever his fiercest supporter, saved pennies to buy him sketch pads and cheap watercolor sets. "Your art," she would say, "will be the voice the world can't ignore." But as Darnell grew older and ventured into the professional art world, he discovered that the barriers he faced weren't just financial. His applications to prestigious galleries were met with polite rejections or, worse, silence. At exhibitions, his presence as a young black man often drew skepticism. He'd overhear whispers questioning whether he truly belonged among the elite art connoisseurs. The pivotal moment came during his first attempt to showcase his work at Hargrove Gallery, one of the city's most respected venues. The gallery, run by the silver-haired and sharp-tongued Mr. Everett Hargrove, was known for launching the careers of promising artists, if they fit his vision. Darnell had arrived with a portfolio of his best pieces, carefully wrapped and clutched tightly to his chest. "Let me guess," Hargrove said, glancing at Darnell's worn clothes and the faint stains of paint on his hands. "Street art? Graffiti-inspired work?" Darnell's jaw tightened, but he kept his composure. "I'd like to show you my paintings. They're contemporary, rooted in cultural narratives." "Ah, yes, cultural narratives," Hargrove interrupted, waving a dismissive hand. "Everyone wants to play the identity card these days. But art buyers want timeless pieces, not political statements." Despite Darnell's attempts to explain the depth and universal themes in his work, Hargrove barely glanced at the paintings. "These might sell at a community fair," he said with a smirk. "But here? I don't think so. Good luck, though." The rejection stung, but it wasn't just the words, it was the way Hargrove had spoken to him, as though Darnell's art, and by extension Darnell himself, was unworthy of serious consideration. It was a moment that crystallized the harsh reality of the art world for him. Yet, Darnell wasn't one to give up. He retreated to his studio, pouring his frustration and hurt into his work. Months passed, and the walls of his studio became lined with paintings, each more powerful than the last. Still, galleries continued to reject him, their reasons growing increasingly flimsy. It was during one particularly disheartening night that an idea struck him. If the world wouldn't see him for who he was, then perhaps it was time to become someone else. Adopting the pseudonym C. Westwood, Darnell began submitting his work anonymously to galleries and collectors. The change was almost immediate. Under this new identity, his art was lauded for its raw emotion and innovative perspective. Pieces that had been dismissed before were now being sold for tens of thousands of dollars. Collectors clamored for more, unaware of the artist's true identity. As C. Westwood's reputation grew, Darnell kept his secret carefully guarded. Only his mother and a few close friends knew the truth. The pseudonym gave him the freedom to exist without prejudice, but it also left him bitter. Why did it take a false name for his art to be recognized? Years later, Darnell's work under the Westwood moniker had become a global sensation, fetching millions at auctions. He'd watched from the shadows as critics and buyers praised his genius without ever knowing the face behind the brush. The duality of his life was exhausting but necessary. Then, one day, everything changed. While browsing an art catalog, Darnell stumbled upon one of his early pieces, a painting he had sold to a local buyer for a modest sum. The piece, titled Echoes of Freedom, was listed for auction at an estimated value of $3 million. The description gushed about its significance and the mysterious allure of the artist, C. Westwood. Darnell's hands clenched the catalog. This was his work, his soul laid bare on canvas, and yet he had no claim to it. Worse, the gallery handling the auction was none other than Hargrove Gallery. The irony was too bitter to ignore. The same man who had mocked him and dismissed his talent was now profiting from his genius. The realization sparked something in Darnell, anger, yes, but also resolve. For years, he had been content to let C. Westwood take the spotlight, but now he saw the truth. The art world wasn't just blind, it was exploitative. And he had the power to change that. That night, as Darnell stood in his studio surrounded by his creations, he made a decision. It was time to reclaim his identity, his art, and his legacy. But he wouldn't just confront Hargrove, he would dismantle the very system that had tried to keep him invisible. The seeds of revenge were planted, and with them, the blueprint for a new chapter in his life. One where Darnell Price, not C. Westwood, would take center stage. The echoes of Darnell's childhood often found their way into his work. Growing up in a rundown neighborhood, his family's modest apartment had barely enough space for him to sleep, let alone paint. Yet, he made do with what he had, a corner in the kitchen where his mother would set up a makeshift easel for him. She couldn't afford expensive art supplies, but she always encouraged him to use whatever he could find. Old magazines became his inspiration, and scraps of cardboard turned into his canvases. Art was more than an outlet for Darnell, it was his lifeline. It allowed him to process the hardships of his environment, violence, poverty, and the constant threat of eviction. His mother, Gloria, was his greatest cheerleader, often marveling at the depth of emotion he could convey with just a few strokes of his brush. "You have a gift, baby," she would say. "Someday, the world is gonna see it." But as much as Gloria believed in him, the world was not as kind. When Darnell reached his teenage years, he began seeking opportunities to showcase his talent. Local community events were his first foray into public recognition. While some praised his work, others dismissed it, branding it as too raw or too political. Darnell poured everything he had into his art, hoping that someone, somewhere, would understand its value. But time and time again, doors were shut in his face. The rejections grew harsher, and even those who initially supported him began to waver. One betrayal, in particular, left a lasting scar. A local curator, who had once promised to mentor Darnell, abruptly cut ties after a few unsuccessful attempts to market his art. "It's just not sellable, Darnell," the curator had said, handing him back his portfolio. "Maybe if you toned down the message or made it more universal." Universal. Darnell had come to despise the word. It was always code for erasing the very essence of who he was. That rejection became a turning point. Darnell realized that if he wanted his art to be seen, he couldn't rely on the goodwill of others. He needed to take matters into his own hands. The birth of C. Westwood. Late one night, sitting in his dimly lit studio, Darnell stared at one of his unfinished pieces, a haunting depiction of a young boy standing in a field of shattered mirrors. The boy's face was turned away, his identity obscured. The painting seemed to whisper an idea to Darnell: what if the world didn't need to know who he was? He spent the next few weeks crafting his new identity. C. Westwood was born, a name devoid of racial or cultural markers, a blank slate for the art world to project its admiration onto. To complete the illusion, Darnell created a fictional biography. Westwood was a reclusive artist who avoided public appearances, allowing the art to speak for itself. At first, Darnell wasn't sure if the plan would work. But as he began submitting his pieces under the pseudonym, the response was overwhelming. Galleries that had once ignored him now clamored to display his work. Critics praised C. Westwood's refreshing perspective and uncompromising vision. The disparity between his two lives was both exhilarating and infuriating. As C. Westwood, he was celebrated. But as Darnell Price, he remained invisible. He attended his own exhibitions incognito, blending into the crowd as wealthy collectors bid on his paintings. The disconnect between their admiration for his work and their disregard for him as a person was a constant reminder of the systemic biases he faced. Building a secret empire. Despite the bitterness, Darnell found solace in the art itself. He continued to produce work that resonated deeply with audiences, using the profits from his sales to quietly build a network of loyal buyers and investors. Some of these individuals eventually learned the truth about his identity, but they respected his decision to remain anonymous. Through this network, Darnell began to gain power, financially and socially. He invested in emerging artists, particularly those from marginalized backgrounds, offering them opportunities he had been denied. He also began purchasing pieces from underappreciated creators, ensuring their work wouldn't be exploited by the same system that had once rejected him. One of his most significant moves was hiring a trusted confidant, Jasmine, to act as his intermediary. Jasmine handled all communications as C. Westwood's representative, ensuring Darnell's anonymity remained intact. Together, they built a carefully curated portfolio of collectors who appreciated his work for its artistic value, not just its price tag. Hargrove's fall. Years passed, and Darnell's empire flourished. C. Westwood was now a household name in the art world, with pieces displayed in prestigious galleries across the globe. But despite his success, there was one name that continued to haunt him: Everett Hargrove. The memory of Hargrove's dismissive words lingered in Darnell's mind, a reminder of the prejudice he had fought so hard to overcome. It wasn't just personal. Hargrove represented everything wrong with the art world, a gatekeeper who profited off exclusion and exploitation. One evening, as Jasmine reviewed potential acquisitions, she mentioned a surprising piece of news. "Hargrove Gallery is struggling," she said, handing Darnell a report. Darnell raised an eyebrow. "Struggling how?" "Financially. Their sales have been declining for years. Apparently, they're looking for investors." A slow smile spread across Darnell's face. The irony was too delicious to ignore. The gallery that had once turned him away now needed saving, and he had the means to do it. But Darnell wasn't interested in saving Hargrove. He wanted to take control. "Make the offer," he told Jasmine. Anonymously. "Let's see how desperate they really are." Jasmine hesitated. "Are you sure? This could get messy." Darnell nodded. "I've been waiting for this moment my entire life. It's time to level the playing field. A quiet takeover." The offer was submitted, and within weeks, Darnell became the majority stakeholder in Hargrove Gallery. The acquisition was carefully orchestrated to keep his identity hidden, for now. He wanted to see how Hargrove would react when the truth was finally revealed. As he stood in the gallery one evening, disguised as just another visitor, Darnell took in the space that had once rejected him. He watched as Hargrove fawned over wealthy patrons, oblivious to the fact that the man who now owned the gallery was standing just a few feet away. For Darnell, the moment was bittersweet. The gallery's walls were lined with art, much of it from artists who, like him, had likely faced rejection and prejudice. But now, under his ownership, the gallery had the potential to become something greater, a sanctuary for those who had been silenced. The rise of Darnell Price, hidden behind the name C. Westwood, was nearly complete. All that remained was the final act, revealing his true identity and transforming the art world forever: the gallery drama. Darnell Price adjusted the lapels of his tailored jacket and stepped out of the sleek black car that had just pulled up to the curb outside the Hargrove Gallery. It had been years since he last set foot in this space, but the memories of his earlier rejection were as vivid as if they had happened yesterday. The gallery loomed before him, its pristine white façade gleaming in the midday sun. Through the large glass windows, he could see elegantly dressed patrons, browsing the carefully curated displays. It was the same atmosphere of exclusivity and pretension that had once turned him away. But this time, Darnell wasn't here as the struggling artist he had been. Today, he was someone else. Observing the disparity. Inside, the gallery hummed with quiet activity. A few collectors meandered through the space, admiring the pieces on display. Darnell moved through the room, his sharp eye taking in every detail. He noted the way the staff, dressed in sleek black uniforms, hovered attentively around certain patrons, those who exuded wealth and status. But there was another side to the gallery that Darnell couldn't ignore. Near the back, a young black artist stood awkwardly by a corner, clutching a portfolio. He had an air of nervous hope, the same look Darnell had worn years ago. The staff, however, avoided making eye contact with him, and the artist's timid attempts to engage were met with curt responses. Darnell watched as the artist was eventually dismissed with a vague, "We'll be in touch," despite the portfolio never being opened. Moments later, a middle-aged white artist arrived with a similar portfolio, and the staff instantly sprang into action, ushering him toward Mr. Hargrove's office. The disparity was glaring, and it made Darnell's blood boil. But he kept his composure, his face betraying none of the anger simmering beneath the surface. A familiar mocking tone. After making his way through the gallery, Darnell approached a staff member and inquired about speaking with the owner. Moments later, he found himself face to face with Everett Hargrove, the man who had dismissed him so cruelly all those years ago. Hargrove hadn't changed much. His silver hair was neatly combed, and his sharp suit looked as though it had been tailored that morning. He greeted Darnell with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, clearly assessing whether this new visitor was worth his time. "How can I help you?" Hargrove asked, his tone polite but condescending. Darnell adopted a casual demeanor, his voice smooth and confident. "I was wondering if you might be interested in exhibiting some pieces from my private collection." Hargrove raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued but skeptical. "Do you represent an artist?" Darnell nodded. "In a way. The pieces are older works, created by someone who's gained some recognition under a pseudonym. I thought they might fit well here." Hargrove's lips curled into a smirk. "Older works, you say? Well, we're very particular about what we showcase here. We cater to a discerning clientele who expect only the finest. Do you have any examples on hand?" Darnell handed him a small portfolio, containing photographs of some of his earlier works, pieces that Hargrove had once dismissed as unsellable. As Hargrove flipped through the images, his expression shifted from boredom to something resembling disdain. "These are interesting," Hargrove said, closing the portfolio abruptly. "But they're not quite the caliber of work we typically exhibit. Perhaps you'd have better luck at a smaller venue." Darnell's jaw tightened, but he forced a polite smile. "That's unfortunate," he said. "I had hoped to find a space that could appreciate their significance." Hargrove's smirk deepened. "Significance is subjective, isn't it? But I wish you the best of luck." Hinting at an interest. Darnell lingered for a moment, letting the silence stretch just long enough to make Hargrove uncomfortable. Then, with an air of casual curiosity, he said, "It's a shame, really. This gallery has such potential, but I've heard whispers that it's struggling." Hargrove's smile faltered, replaced by a flicker of defensiveness. "Struggling? Hardly. We've had some fluctuations, but the gallery remains one of the city's premier art destinations." Darnell tilted his head, feigning concern. "Of course. But I imagine it must be difficult to maintain such a reputation in a market that's always evolving. If you ever consider taking on investors, I might be interested." Hargrove's eyes narrowed slightly as he assessed Darnell, trying to gauge his seriousness. "An investor, you say?" Darnell shrugged. "I have a passion for art, and I've been considering expanding my portfolio. A space like this could be a worthwhile investment, under the right circumstances." The comment hung in the air, and for a moment, Hargrove seemed genuinely intrigued. But he quickly masked his interest with a dismissive chuckle. "Well, we're not in the market for investors at the moment. But I'll keep your offer in mind." Darnell smiled again, his eyes glinting with quiet determination. "Please do." The formal offer. A week later, Hargrove received an official letter from a legal firm representing a mysterious investor. The letter expressed interest in acquiring the gallery, citing its potential for revitalization and long-term growth. The offer was generous, far exceeding the gallery's current valuation, and it came with a stipulation: the buyer's identity would remain confidential until the sale was finalized. Hargrove was initially hesitant. Selling the gallery meant relinquishing control, and his pride resisted the idea. But as the gallery's financial struggles mounted and the prospect of bankruptcy loomed, he found himself with little choice. Within weeks, the deal was sealed. Hargrove signed the papers, his hand shaking slightly as he realized he was no longer the owner of the gallery he had spent decades building. He consoled himself with the thought that he had secured a handsome payout and that the new owner, whoever they were, would likely fail to uphold the gallery's reputation. Unbeknownst to him, the new owner had no intention of maintaining the status quo. Darnell's quiet victory. On the day the sale was finalized, Darnell returned to the gallery, this time without a disguise. He walked through the familiar halls, his presence unnoticed by the staff who were busy preparing for the upcoming announcement of the new ownership. Standing in the center of the gallery, surrounded by the works that had been deemed worthy by Hargrove's standards, Darnell allowed himself a moment of quiet satisfaction. The space that had once rejected him was now his. As he left the gallery that evening, he paused by the door, looking back at the name etched above the entrance. The Hargrove Gallery. Not for much longer, he thought. Soon, it would bear a name that represented something far greater than one man's ego. It would become a place of transformation, a haven for the artists who had been silenced for too long. The drama of the gallery was far from over. For Darnell, it was only the beginning. The grand opening of the newly rebranded Hargrove Gallery was an event the city wouldn't soon forget. Invitations were sent to artists, collectors, and critics, each one adorned with the cryptic tagline, "Art has a new face." The promise of an unveiling and the mystery surrounding the gallery's new ownership created an electric buzz. Industry insiders speculated wildly about who the buyer might be, but no one, not even the former owner Everett Hargrove, could have predicted the truth. The gallery was transformed into a luminous space, with spotlights highlighting curated pieces from up-and-coming artists. Guests moved through the hall, sipping champagne and marveling at the vibrant works that adorned the walls, works that defied convention and challenged the norms of what art was supposed to be. Darnell stood backstage, his heart pounding. Jasmine stood by his side, her hand on his shoulder. "You've got this," she said with a reassuring smile. He nodded, exhaling slowly. Tonight wasn't just about revealing his identity. It was about making a statement that the art world would never forget. The moment of truth. As the clock struck 8, the lights dimmed, and a hush fell over the crowd. A spotlight illuminated the stage, where Everett Hargrove, dressed in his usual tailored suit, stepped forward. Unaware of what was about to unfold, he addressed the audience with his typical air of self-importance. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the dawn of a new era for this gallery," he began, his voice oozing with practiced charm. "Under its new ownership, we remain committed to excellence and tradition." Hargrove's words were cut off as another spotlight clicked on, illuminating Darnell as he stepped onto the stage. His presence was commanding, his expression calm but resolute. Gasps rippled through the audience, followed by a stunned silence. "Thank you, Mr. Hargrove," Darnell said, taking the microphone from his hand. "But tonight isn't about tradition. It's about transformation." Hargrove's face twisted in confusion, then dawning horror, as he realized who stood before him. Darnell turned to address the crowd, his voice steady and clear. "My name is Darnell Price. Some of you may know me by another name, C. Westwood." The room erupted into murmurs, disbelief mingling with recognition. Hargrove's jaw dropped as he staggered back, his carefully constructed world beginning to crumble. "Yes," Darnell continued, "I am the artist whose work you've celebrated under a name that allowed me to exist beyond the biases and barriers of this industry. Tonight, I stand before you not as a pseudonym, but as myself." A speech that shook the room. Darnell's speech was both a revelation and a reckoning. He recounted his journey, from the rejections and prejudice he faced as a young black artist to the creation of his pseudonym and the double life he had led. "For years, I watched my work being praised while I, as a person, was dismissed. The same galleries that once turned me away were eager to profit from my creations when they thought I was someone else. The same critics who ignored my name lauded my talent when it was hidden behind a mask." His voice grew firmer as he addressed the systemic issues in the art world. This industry has long been a fortress of exclusivity, where power and privilege dictate. Success. Artists from marginalized communities are told to dilute their voices, to conform to a standard that erases their identity. But art isn't about conformity. It's about truth. And tonight, we're here to rewrite the rules. The crowd, initially stunned, erupted into applause. Artists in the audience wiped away tears, while others nodded in agreement. Darnell's words weren't just his story, they were a mirror reflecting the experiences of so many others. The unveiling. Darnell gestured to the walls of the gallery, where several new works had been covered with white cloths. With a theatrical flourish, he began unveiling them one by one. Each piece was part of his personal collection, created during his journey as both Darnell Price and C. Westwood. The first painting, Resilience, depicted a young boy standing in a field of broken mirrors, his reflection scattered yet radiant. The second, Unveiled, showed a masked figure shedding its disguise, stepping into the light. Each piece told a story of struggle, identity, and triumph. Together, they formed a visual autobiography, chronicling Darnell's journey from obscurity to recognition. The audience was mesmerized. Collectors whispered among themselves, speculating on the astronomical value of these works. Critics scribbled furiously in their notebooks, eager to capture the significance of the moment. Hargrove's shock and anger. Everett Hargrove, meanwhile, stood frozen at the edge of the stage. His face was a mask of disbelief and fury as he realized the full extent of what had happened. The gallery he had once controlled was now in the hands of the very artist he had dismissed. You planned this," he stammered, his voice trembling with outrage. Darnell turned to him, his expression calm but unyielding. "I didn't just plan this, Mr. Hargrove. I built it. Every piece of art you see here, every artist whose voice was silenced, I did this for them. And now, this gallery will stand for something greater than you ever allowed it to be." Hargrove stormed out of the room, his departure met with scattered applause from those who had long resented his dominance in the art world. A new mission. With Hargrove gone, Darnell turned his attention back to the audience. "This gallery will no longer be a gatekeeper," he declared. "It will be a sanctuary for artists who have been ignored, dismissed, and silenced. It will be a space where creativity thrives without compromise, where every voice is heard." He announced new initiatives, scholarships for underprivileged artists, mentorship programs, and a rotating exhibit dedicated to showcasing works from marginalized communities around the world. "The Price Gallery of Visionary Art," he said, revealing the gallery's new name, "will stand as a beacon for those who dare to dream, create, and challenge the status quo." The room erupted into a standing ovation. Artists hugged each other, collectors pledged. A refugee painter, and a single mother who created intricate sculptures from recycled materials. "This gallery isn't just mine," Darnell told his team during one of their planning meetings. "It belongs to every artist who was told they didn't belong." New success stories. The gallery's impact was immediate and profound. Artists who had long been ignored found themselves thrust into the spotlight, their work celebrated for its authenticity and innovation. One of the gallery's breakout stars was Amara Ndiaye, a Senegalese painter whose vibrant, abstract pieces explored themes of migration and identity. Before exhibiting at the Price Gallery, Amara had struggled to sell her work locally. After her solo show, her paintings were featured in international publications, and she received commissions from major institutions. Another success story was Caleb Ortiz, a young queer sculptor from Texas who used salvaged materials to create hauntingly beautiful installations. Caleb's exhibit at the gallery garnered critical acclaim and led to an artist residency in Europe. The stories poured in: Maria Alvarez's public sculpture commission, Jamal Brooks's sold-out abstract series, and Mei Ling's global photography exhibition. These artists weren't just finding success, they were changing the narrative of what the art world valued. Darnell's reflection. Late one evening, long after the gallery had closed, Darnell sat alone in his office. The room was filled with reminders of his journey, early sketches, photographs from his first exhibitions, and letters from artists whose lives had been changed by the gallery. He leaned back in his chair, allowing himself a moment of reflection. The journey had been long and fraught with challenges. There had been moments of doubt, heartbreak, and exhaustion. But as he looked around, he realized the weight of his struggles had forged something extraordinary. His thoughts drifted to his mother, Gloria, who had passed away a year earlier. He imagined her standing beside him, beaming with pride. Her words echoed in his mind, "Your art will be the voice the world can't ignore." "I did it, Mom," he whispered. "We did it." A heartfelt moment with the community. A few weeks later, the gallery hosted its first community celebration night, an event open to everyone, free of charge. The space was alive with music, laughter, and a sense of unity. Families wandered through the exhibits, children participated in art workshops, and artists shared their stories in panel discussions. Darnell moved through the crowd, greeting visitors and listening to their experiences. He met a young boy who reminded him of himself at that age, clutching a sketchpad filled with drawings. The boy's mother thanked Darnell for creating a space where her son could dream. Their support, and journalists scrambled to capture the historic moment. A legacy begins. As the night wore on, Darnell mingled with the guests, listening to their stories and sharing his vision for the future. He met young artists who told him how his journey had inspired them, and seasoned collectors who promised to support his mission. For Darnell, the evening was more than just a victory. It was the beginning of a legacy, one built on inclusivity, resilience, and the transformative power of art. As he stood in the center of the gallery, surrounded by the people whose lives he had touched, Darnell felt a deep sense of fulfillment. He had not only reclaimed his identity but had also paved the way for others to do the same. The revelation was complete, and with it, a new chapter in the art world had begun: redemption and legacy. The morning after the unveiling, the art world was abuzz with news of Darnell Price's triumphant reveal. Headlines splashed across newspapers and websites: "The artist behind C. Westwood, a story of resilience and justice, Darnell Price rewrites the rules of the art world," and Hargrove Gallery's new vision under Darnell Price. For Darnell, the media frenzy was secondary to the work that lay ahead. His transformation of the gallery had just begun. Hargrove's downfall. Everett Hargrove, humiliated and out of power, became a cautionary tale in the art world. Collectors who had once revered him now distanced themselves, wary of associating with his tarnished reputation. His dismissive treatment of artists, particularly those from marginalized backgrounds, was exposed through testimonials and Darnell's revelations. Hargrove attempted to regain his footing, hosting small private shows and leveraging his remaining connections. But the damage was done. The gallery he once ruled with an iron fist now symbolized the very inclusivity he had fought against, and his name became a footnote in the industry, a reminder of what happens when power is misused. The transformation of the gallery. Under Darnell's leadership, the newly christened Price Gallery of Visionary Art became a beacon of hope. The physical space underwent a transformation to match its new mission. Walls that had once showcased only the elite now displayed a kaleidoscope of talent. From vibrant street art to poignant sculptures and multimedia installations, Darnell instituted policies that dismantled the barriers many artists faced. Submission fees were eliminated, and a panel of diverse curators was established to ensure fair representation. The gallery partnered with community organizations to provide free workshops, mentoring programs, and resources for underrepresented artists. One of the most revolutionary initiatives was the Emerging Voices Fellowship, which provided funding, studio space, and mentorship for young artists from underserved communities. The program's first cohort included a former graffiti artist. As the evening drew to a close, Darnell stood on the gallery's steps, addressing the crowd that had gathered outside. The city skyline glowed behind him as he spoke. "This gallery is more than a building," he said, his voice carrying across the courtyard. "It's a promise that art will no longer be confined by prejudice or privilege. It's a place where every story matters, where every voice is heard." The crowd erupted into cheers and applause. Darnell's eyes scanned the faces before him, each one a testament to the power of community and resilience. The closing scene. Later that night, After the last guest had left, Darnell stood in the gallery, the space quiet and still. He walked to the centerpiece of the exhibit, the artist's journey, a new painting he had unveiled earlier that evening. The piece depicted a lone figure standing at the edge of a vast, open road, surrounded by vibrant landscapes that seemed to stretch endlessly. For Darnell, the painting wasn't just a reflection of his journey, it was a symbol of the paths yet to be forged, the voices yet to be heard. As he turned off the gallery lights and stepped outside, he felt the cool night air on his face. The city hummed around him, alive with possibility. For the first time in years, Darnell felt at peace. He had reclaimed his power, transformed his pain into purpose, and created a legacy that would endure. The Price Gallery of Visionary Art wasn't just a space for art, it was a movement, one that would shape the future for generations to come.